Hi, everyone. Welcome to another Ancient Warfare Answers, your weekly dose of ancient warfare with me, Murray Darm. I'm the assistant editor of Ancient Warfare magazine. And today we're going to be answering a question about Oliganthropia, which is a fabulous word to say. You should practice it now. It comes from Aristotle. And before we get to that, of course, you can ask us questions if you would like to about anything to do with ancient warfare. And we'll have a go at answering it if we can. And of course, you can ask us a question via an email, via a comment, via a Facebook message, and you can back us on Patreon and ask us a question there too. Just go to the Patreon website and look for Ancient Warfare Podcast, and that's us, and you can back us at 3 different levels. Now, today's question is about Oliganthropia. Now, if you don't know what Oliganthropia is, it is a phrase coined by Aristotle in the Politics about the decline in Spartan manpower. And it's something that the ancients recognized, well, the Athenians, not sure that the Spartans did. And so the actual question is the number of Spartan soldiers declined from its height of 10,000 to less than 2,000 around its defeat by Thebes, due in part to increasing economic concentration and the resulting decline in the number of soldiers able to pay their mess contributions. Did Spartan society recognize this decline as a problem, and were there efforts to reverse this trend? If there were, why did they fail? That's from James O'Keefe. Hello, James. Well, the first thing is, the Spartans, as far as we know, don't seem to have recognized this as an issue. We don't get, obviously, any Spartan sources. We only have Athenian sources or Athenian-biased sources in Herodotus and Thucydides, and then, of course, Xenophon and then Diodorus. So it's recognized by Aristotle, and that's obviously in the 4th century BC that he recognizes that there's been a decline in Spartan manpower. The Spartan attitude doesn't seem to have been one of quantity, but one of quality. That the Spartan homoioi, the equals, were still the same, and it's also an issue in terms of trying to understand our sources, which are very fragmentary, and what we've got, therefore, is this idea that there's 10,000 Spartans at the beginning of the Spartan history, when it adopts the agoge of Lycurgus, and then by the Battle of Plataea in 479 BC, we get given the number 5,000 Spartan citizens, and then by the Battle of Mantinea in 418 BC, that has shrunk to 4,200 as a sort of a total. It might even be lower. There are arguments about the numbers involved at the Battle of Mantinea. It might be as low as 3,600. So over that course of 50 or 60 years, it seems that the Spartans have lost 1,200 in their numbers, and that those numbers are irreplaceable. One of the key battles to understand that, of course, is the Battle of Sphacteria, where 120 Spartan citizens are taken prisoner, and that small number of Spartan citizens is enough to make Sparta sue for peace. So it's sort of a sign to us, of course, that the writing's on the wall, that their numbers are declining, and that the loss of any numbers is a serious and detrimental loss to their strength. And so what you then get is, by the Battle of Coronea in 394 BC, so even after they've won the Peloponnesian War, that seems to have slipped even further to 2,500, and yet they haven't really suffered any military losses in the meantime. The other issue there, and it may be that, again, there's just a massive gap in our sources, is that between the Battle of Mantinea in 418 BC and then the Battle of Leuctra in 371 BC, we have some kind of major change in the organization of Spartan armies. So whereas in the Battle of Mantinea, we get Thucydides going into an immense detail about the organization of the 5 lochoi of Sparta, which are the 5 original villages, the Obai. Again, it's a bit of a problem because the 5 original villages of Sparta don't correspond to the 5 names of the Lochoi, which is problematic. And again, our only source for those is actually a play by Aristophanes, the Lysistrata. And by the time you get to Xenophon, he's not talking about Lochoi at all. He's talking about Mora or Morai in plural. So something changes, and we don't know when, and we don't know why that changes between the Battle of Mantinea and the Battle of Leuctra. And then, of course, at the Battle of Leuctra, Sparta fields, depending on the source, 1,500 Spartan citizens. And so it's already in massive decline. Of course, its power is not broken until the Battle of Mantinea in 362 BC. And the issue there, of course, is that it can't recover. It doesn't have the manpower to recover. And there's already some signs. Maybe you could possibly argue that they recognize it based on the fact that, for instance, at the Battle of Mantinea, in addition to the 5 ancestral Lochoi, they've got 2 more. One of the Neodam, the new men, which is made up of, we think of Helots, the Neodamides, and you've also got the Brasidioi, who seem to be the veterans of Brasidas' campaign up to Amphipolis in 422. So you've got the 5 plus 2 more. So maybe, but they don't turn them into Spartan citizens. They are separate and organized separately than the Spartan citizens. So in that sense, they are going to stick to their traditional organization no matter what. And then, of course, you get the idea that at the Battle of Mantinea, they lose 300 men, and that's a massive loss. They sued for peace, losing 120 men, and then they lose 300 in a battle. So it seems to be that the Spartans remain unable to reform their society to fix the problem, if they were aware of it. There is another argument, of course, that perhaps they aren't as weak as Aristotle would have us. One version of events is, of course, that the original design of Sparta actually only had 6,400 citizens at the peak, so not 10,000, but 6,400, and that therefore the decline in numbers is not as drastic as people would have it, and certainly, the Spartan system stays in place, and even though later on, there's 200 Spartan citizens, they still sort of maintain the same system and things like that. So it's an interesting one. It's one that's recognized by outsiders, by Athenians especially, and not one that we sort of see recognized by Sparta, unless we argue that those ideas of having additional men and arming ex-helots and things like that are recognitions of their manpower shortage. And of course, they always have Peloponnesian hoplites from Perioikoi cities, from the dwellers around. So it's an interesting one. It's possibly something that has been exaggerated by Athenian sources to make it look like the Spartans have declined. Of course, those declines don't really happen until the later part of the 4th century. So the decline is long in coming, even if was obvious early on. So even if you look at Plataea to Mantinea, it's 110, 120 years of history. And yes, they decline in that period, but that's 120 years of history. So it certainly wasn't going to happen tomorrow at any point in time. And the defeat of Sparta at both Leuctra and Mantinea is still shocking to Greece as a whole. So that idea that they were somehow on the cusp of being powerless is a fallacy. So I think that they didn't recognize it. And if they did, perhaps they were too tied up in traditional methods to be able to fix it, even though there are some tentative things which suggest reforms which may have been to deal with manpower, but we can't argue that definitively. I hope that answers your question, James. All right. See you next time. Lovely.